Adidas is a German multinational corporation that designs and manufactures sports clothing and accessories. It is the largest sportswear manufacturer in Europe, and the second largest in the world, after Nike. Like other multinational companies, there are some secrets about this company that you do not know about. For starters, it would interest you to know that Adidas does not mean, all day I dream about soccer, neither does it mean, all day I dream about sports. But just before we get into this, let's take it from the start. From the key figures and the start of the Adidas brand. Adidas before the fame. The history of Adidas, when told in today's history, would be very much incomplete with the absence of the Dassler family. A relatively small family wallowing in the shackles of poverty like many small families in Germany at this point in history. But amongst the whole family, one of the most notable figures would be Adolf Dassler, born on the 3rd of November to a shoemaker father and a laundress as a mother. Given the kind of family Adolf was born into, the hope of becoming something great never crossed his mind. He settled for helping out in his father's business, something that would quickly become his way out of poverty, bringing his name to the world. By 1920, when Adolf would reach the ripe age of 20, it was decided that the family would begin its own shoemaking business. But make no mistake, this idea was in no way strange in Germany at this point, as there were hundreds of this type of family-owned business populating the economy. A few years after the start of the family shoe business, his elder brother, Rudolf Dassler, joined the business. Together the brothers began the Gebrüder Dassler Schuhfabrik Company. To those that were familiar with them, the name remained Adi and Rudi. While they paraded the business as a full-blown business, it was way lesser than this. The factory was located in the basement of their mother's laundry store, where they made orthopedic shoes for athletes and house slippers. In the end, what would distinguish the Dassler brothers' shoe factory from the thousands of others in Germany was the persistent experiment Adolf conducted with the shapes he made, trying to make the shoes a better fit for all those who needed them. The footwear sale that would change the name of Adidas forever. Many experiments with no real improvement to distinguish the family shoe business from every other. Yet, the elder brother of the duo was unrelenting, and he did get a breakthrough in the shoemaking world in 1925. What soon became the best-selling of the Dassler brothers' shoes would come from their partnership with a reputable blacksmith company. The terms of the partnership were that the Dassler brothers produced shoes that would require spikes produced by the blacksmith underneath the soles of the sports shoes. This was arguably the first time this idea was put into production. And it was a very successful one. The production of this design of shoes became a popular demand amongst people of the neighboring company. It became great with sales that the brothers then had to move out from the basement of their mother's laundromat into a new factory. But the shoes were better than a community product, and Adolf was very sure of that. In 1928, a new design from the spike shoes was created. This new model was a better fit and was designed alongside Josef Pfizer. Being a great track shoe, it remained how to bring the merchandise to the targeted audience. Then came 1936, just before this year's Olympic Games, and the idea of gifting a track athlete this shoe surfaced. Jesse Owens would be the key figure in bringing the new patent design to the world. Jesse Owens, a man amongst the fastest of his era, wore the Dassler brothers' shoes to the Olympics, and he was graced with colossal success. The track athlete went on to win 4 gold medals and broke 5 different records across different racing events during the Olympics while wearing the Dassler spike shoes. The news of Owens's strange 2 white striped shoes spread to the nook of places and got everyone wanting a piece of the design. It became a symbol of not just good luck but also of ease and stability for athletes. By the end of the 1930s, the Dassler brothers' shoe factory accrued to over 400,000 German marks, which was equivalent to $100,000, and in 1938, the second Dassler factory opened, allowing them to turn out over 1,000 pairs of shoes per day. Then came World War II. For many companies during this era, this was the turning point. The Second World War was what tainted many companies and broke them by the spinal cord, a hit which many never recovered from. The Dassler brothers were one of those to be greatly affected by the war that raged on for years. Before the start of the war, the company was at the peak of its growth. It registered the highest production from demand and sales of produce, selling over 200,000 pairs of shoes in Europe. Yet, all of this became inconsequential when the war became brutal. Of course, both brothers were proud members of the Nazi Party, yet this did not save their factories from being confiscated by the Nazis, nor did it save them from being sent to the war front in battle. In one of the acquired factories, the Nazis began to use the equipment in the factory to make handheld anti-tank grenade launchers. But this was impossible because the machines were not built to withstand the pressure the Nazis mounted on them. A year later, the Dassler brothers' investment was the only remaining German shoe producer. Hence, the younger of the Dassler brothers returned to the factory. Adolf Dassler returned to what remained of the factory from the war front, placed under direct instructions to make shoes for the German soldiers. The company was tasked with producing shoes worn by the entire unified forces of Germany through most of the war. But just before the end of the Second World War, the second factory located in Herzogenaurach, off the hands of the Nazis through the war, came under the Americans. In 1943, the shoe factory was forced to shut down. The American forces had almost destroyed the shoe factory through their activities. However, it was stopped midway owing to the actions of Adolf's wife. She was able to convince the Americans that the factory was purely a shoemaking factory and had no connection with the Nazis. In retrospect, it is, in fact, interesting how the American forces, being the foremost assailant of the company, became major buyers of the Dassler brothers' shoes as soon as the Nazis were out of power. The split and rivalry of blood. The war was done, and the world began to pick up the remains of the war, building each of the cities from the ground up. The Dassler brothers were one of the ones that tried to take things back to the way they were before the war came. They quickly got back into the production of shoes. But this time, the shoes they produced were from the remnants of military equipment. They went as far as making the soles of shoes from the tires of military vehicles and paid all 47 of their workers that remained with goods like firewood and yarn. Things could have gotten better, but the war had an adverse impact on the relationship between the brothers. They began to fight over their different outlooks on life and how they expected the future of the company to be patterned. It became apparent to them that they couldn't continue coexisting as visionaries of the same brand. After the death of their father, both brothers agreed to go their separate ways in 1948. They divided what remained of their assets and agreed that neither party would make use of the family name or business symbol. This separation would become what is known as the greatest rivalry between the two brands. As Adolf established himself under the new brand name called Adidas, Rudolf took up Ruda, which was the short form of his name Rudolf Dassler. While both brothers never spoke about the reasons for the incessant fights till their deaths, two reasons were rumored as the founding basis of their fights. One was the strife between both of their wives, who failed to get along with each other but were forced to live in the same villa, and two was that Rudolf continually suspected that his brother Adolf was the mastermind behind his conscription into the army during the war and his short imprisonment by the Allies. The brands they would both create are today known as Adidas and Puma. The former being Adolf Dassler's legacy and Puma Rudolf Dassler's. Adidas' trademarked logo today is not 2 stripes. It's 3. The third stripe came from another company known as Karu. After the war, many companies could not get back on their feet as the war had eaten too deeply into their mechanism and the will to stay above board. One of those companies was Karu. The logo of Karu, a Finnish company, set up in 1920, was 3 white stripes, and they focused on manufacturing discuses and javelins. But by 1952, the trademark and company as a whole came under Adidas for a sum of £600 and 2 bottles of whiskey. How death brought a rocky part. In 1952, Adidas began to produce other merchandise. The company's first attempt to diversify its assortment was with the production of sports banks. Despite the fact that shoes remained the company's manufactured product, Adolf was looking for a partner who would take over the production of clothes. This, he saw in who became his brand partner. But by 1978, Adidas suffered a great misfortune that would take the company a long period to recover fully. This was the death of the founder member, Adolf Dassler. After he died in 1978, the company came under the leadership of his wife, Kathy Dassler. After her brief leadership, his son, Horst Dassler, came in to turn the shape of the company around to prevent it from sinking under the heavy competition from top brands like Nike and, of course, Puma. But just before his idea of a revitalized company could be implemented, he died, and the company left the family. Adidas came under the leadership of a French industrialist, Bernard Tapie, who was known to rescue companies from bankruptcy. Bernard took production offshore and shifted his focus outside Europe in his grand plan. He went as far as hiring Madonna to help promote the brand. But by 1992, Bernard Tapie could not pay the interest from the loan he took to buy the company and assigned a bank to sell the company. As the new CEO, it was not until Robert Louis Dreyfus that Adidas began to cough up the much-needed progress. During this period, he shifted the company from being so focused on the sales of products to a market-driven company. This was all needed to steer Adidas back on the growth track. The massive sponsorship roles began, and the name became more spread with each sponsorship. Today, the company is known as the second-rated sports brand after Nike. And, of course, the feud between Puma and Adidas has continued ever since, with each of the brands trying as much as possible to outshine the other in terms of sales and innovative sports items and bag designs. This all began with the metal spikes underneath the soles, to the revolutionary Adidas product of screws in place of metal spikes which made the boots weigh almost half of the traditional English football shoe of that era.